Amara had always been desperate. She was raised in poverty, and the desire to escape her humble beginnings consumed her every thought. She believed money could solve every problem, could buy comfort, power, and freedom. She didn't care how she got it, as long as she could live the life of luxury she longed for. In her younger years, Amara had turned to the streets. What began as a way to survive slowly morphed into a business, a dangerous game of seduction and manipulation. She was infamous for weaving her way into the lives of wealthy men, particularly those already entangled in secrets of their own. Husbands, ritualists, scammers, and corrupt politicians. They all fell victim to her charm. But there was one particular type of man who fascinated her the most: the fake pastors. She realized that they were the ultimate prize. They were the epitome of respectability and power, but their so-called divine calling often masked their own vices and greed. Amara took pride in seducing them, basking in the irony that these men, who preached salvation and righteousness, would pay her handsomely for her silence. It was easy money, money that bought her expensive clothes, lavish parties, and a life that seemed to shine brighter than anything she had ever imagined. Among the many men she had lured into her world, Pastor Andy stood out. He was a renowned pastor of The Lord Has Done It Finally Ministry International, a super mega church with a very large congregation. He was a man of influence, with a church that seemed to multiply in wealth by the day. His congregation adored him, but Amara knew better. He wasn't the holy man he claimed to be. His ministry was a business, one that ran on manipulation and deceit. The gospel he preached was one of prosperity, but it was his own prosperity he cared about most. Andy was drawn to Amara's beauty and boldness, and soon he became one of her regular clients. He was married, of course, but that didn't stop him. His visits to Amara's apartment became frequent, his generosity endless. He would brag to her about the lucrative nature of his ministry and how he had built his empire on the backs of the poor, the vulnerable, and the desperate. "Pastoring is a business, Amara," he would say with a sly grin. "People come for salvation, but they pay for their sins. I give them hope, and they give me money. It's the perfect cycle." Amara listened with interest, her eyes gleaming. She could tell that Andy just wanted her body. In return, he paid her generously, making sure her needs were met and her desires were indulged. But Amara wanted more. She became curious about the business behind the scenes, the secrets of how Andy made his money, how he ran his ministry, how he could convince so many people to part with their hard-earned money in the name of faith. She wanted to understand the ropes of his game, to learn how to play it herself and rise even higher. One night, as they lay together in the dim light of her apartment, Amara decided to press him again. She ran a finger along his chest, her voice soft and coaxing. "Andy," she began, "I've been thinking. You always talk about how lucrative this whole thing is, about how people just give and give without asking questions. I want to know how it works. Teach me the ropes. I want to be part of it. I want to learn from you." Pastor Andy shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering for a brief moment. He wasn't used to anyone asking questions like that. His charm was built on controlling the narrative, not sharing it. But Amara's gaze never wavered, her eyes filled with genuine curiosity and a hunger for knowledge that made him pause. "Amara," he said with a forced chuckle, brushing off her hand, "you've got a sharp mind, I'll give you that. But this is not a game you can just pick up like that. It's more than just money. It's about manipulation, psychology, and knowing how to work with people's deepest fears and desires. It's not something you can learn overnight." Amara frowned, but refused to give up. She had never been one to back down when she wanted something. The more Andy dismissed her, the more her determination grew. She wasn't asking for charity, she was asking for a partnership. "Think about it, Andy," she said, her voice smooth and coaxing. "We can open a new ministry where I am the mummy go, and we'll be partners. We can share whatever we make, 50-50. I'm more than just a pretty face with a beautiful body to offer. I can make this work," she insisted, her eyes intense with ambition. "Together we could be unstoppable." Pastor Andy's expression darkened. He had always known Amara was more than just a pawn, but this suggestion was crossing a line. His hand clenched into a fist, his jaw tightening with anger. He could see the fire in her eyes, but he wasn't ready to hand over control. Not yet. "You're nothing but a prostitute," he spat, his voice cold and dismissive. "Don't get over familiar with me, or I'll discard you and replace you just like I've done with others." His words hit Amara like a slap, but she wasn't one to back down. This was the type of opportunity she had been looking for all her life, and she was willing to do anything to get it, including blackmailing Pastor Andy. If he thought he could humiliate her without consequence, he was about to learn how far she was willing to go. Over the next several days, Amara quietly set her plan in motion. She had hidden cameras in her apartment, ones that captured the intimate moments of their most erotic sexual encounters, every whispered promise, every compromising position. It had been a calculated risk, but one that she was confident would pay off. She spent hours reviewing the footage, watching Andy lose himself in a world of sexual pleasure and desire, knowing that every moment was a key to unlocking her future. Once she was sure the footage was solid, she prepared her move. Amara forwarded the videos to Andy, her message clear and threatening. "I have everything. If you don't give me what I want, if you don't teach me how to perform your so-called miracles and reveal the true sources of your power, I'll release these videos. Everyone will see you for the fraud you are. You know what I'm capable of. Don't make me do this." She hit send and waited. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the excitement of finally getting what she wanted. Pastor Andy's response came swiftly, and it was full of fury. His once calm demeanor vanished in a whirlwind of panic. He called her repeatedly, his voice trembling with anger. "Amara, you think you can blackmail me?" he snarled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you never work in this town again." His threats were hollow, but Amara wasn't fooled. He was afraid. She had him exactly where she wanted him. He evicted her from the apartment he had rented for her, cutting her off completely. The luxurious lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, gone in an instant. He told her to leave, warning that if she ever contacted him again, she would regret it. Amara stood in the empty apartment, the weight of his words sinking in. He thought he could silence her by stripping her of everything. But he had underestimated her. As soon as she left the apartment, her mind was already working on her next move. Pastor Andy thought he had control, but he had just made his biggest mistake. Amara had already planned her next move. He had given her the perfect leverage, and now she would use it to her advantage. The following Sunday, she made her move. She donned her most confident expression, dressed in an outfit that screamed authority, and walked into the Lord Has Done It Finally ministry, a 100,000-seater capacity megachurch filled to the brim both inside and in the overflow tents outside. The congregation was alive with fervent worship as Pastor Andy preached at his most intense moment. His voice boomed through the speakers, a mixture of promises of prosperity and divine favor, luring his followers deeper into his manipulation. Amara stood at the back of the church, watching him with a smile that hid her growing anticipation. The power of the moment, the millions of eyes that were about to be on her, it was intoxicating. At the precise moment Andy was at the peak of his sermon, talking about God's miraculous works, Amara made her move. With calm precision, she walked to the pulpit, her steps deliberate and strong. She grabbed a spare microphone, her movements confident as the church fell silent for a brief moment, unsure of what was happening. Amara's voice cut through the air, calm yet commanding. "My name is Amara," she said, as heads turned in confusion, "and I have a confession to make." The shock in the congregation was immediate. People murmured to each other, unsure if this was part of the service, some sort of dramatic skit, or an impromptu testimony. But Amara's next words shattered any remaining doubt. "I have a video," she continued, her tone rising with intensity, "a video that exposes the truth behind the so-called miracles, the lies, and the manipulation. I've seen what happens behind the scenes, and today I will show you the real Pastor Andy, the man who uses God's name to steal, deceive, and control you all." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some stood in shock, others began whispering, while a few tried to get a better view of the situation. The moment Pastor Andy saw Amara standing there, microphone in hand, ready to reveal everything, panic swept over him like a cold wave. His usual calm and composed persona faltered as he rushed forward, his movements frantic. He grabbed the microphone from her forcefully, his face contorted with rage and fear. "Get her out of here," he yelled, turning toward the ushers, his voice trembling with authority that barely hid his panic. The ushers, who had been trained to handle disturbances, hesitated for a moment but quickly moved in to escort Amara off the stage. But Amara didn't resist. She had achieved her aim. She wanted him to know she wasn't bluffing and that she was ready to expose him if he didn't give her what she wanted. As she was escorted away, Pastor Andy quickly turned back to his audience, his composure returning as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Ignore her," he shouted, waving his hand dismissively. "She's just a misguided woman. Nothing more, nothing less. Let's focus on the word of God, not distractions." The congregation, eager to please their pastor and always seeking guidance, fell into the trance of his voice. He rushed through the sermon, his words now tinged with an almost frantic energy. But as he spoke, his mind raced, heart pounding in his chest. He had to get to his office quickly. As soon as the sermon concluded, he instructed the ushers to quickly clear the room, ushering the crowd out while he rushed off the stage. His eyes burned with anger as he hurried toward his office. He had to handle this personally. When he reached his office, he found Amara sitting calmly in one of the chairs, an unsettling smile on her face. "Amara," he barked, slamming the door behind him, "what the hell do you think you're doing? You think you can ruin me? You have no idea what you're up against." His hands clenched into fists as he approached her, but she didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Andy," she said smoothly, leaning back in her chair, "and right now, you're the one in trouble. Your empire is about to crumble simply because you're being too greedy and refusing to share your ingenious business model with me, and now I'm the one holding the keys to your kingdom." She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. "I gave you a choice, but now you'll have to live with the consequences of you don't play by my rules." Pastor Andy's face twisted with rage, but underneath it there was a flicker of fear. He had always been able to control people with lies, with promises, with the illusion of power. But now Amara had exposed the cracks in his armor. The truth, the one thing he had worked so hard to conceal, was no longer in his hands. "You think you've won," Andy hissed, his voice low. "You think you can destroy everything I've built. You're nothing but a whore who's overplayed her hand." Amara smiled, unfazed by his insults. "Call me what you want, but remember, you can't outrun the truth, and I have a video that will make sure everyone knows it." The fear in Andy's eyes deepened as he realized the extent of her power. The video wasn't just a threat anymore. It was the key to his downfall. He had underestimated Amara, and now she was holding the world's most dangerous weapon. As Andy stood there, panicking in his office, Amara knew that her plan was working. The stage had been set, the trap laid. She gave him 24 hours to comply or face her next move. Knowing Amara wasn't bluffing, he quickly decided to indulge her. He had no choice. If he didn't comply, his entire ministry, the wealth, the power, everything, would be ripped away from him in an instant. The thought of the truth being exposed to his followers terrified him more than anything. And so, with a defeated breath, he nodded. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "I'll teach you, but you have to promise you won't take this too far. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Amara smiled, her gaze unwavering. "You should have thought about that before you tried to silence me. Now let's get to work." For the next few days, Pastor Andy took Amara under his wing, showing her the tricks of his deceitful trade. He taught her how to manipulate crowds, how to use false promises of healing and deliverance to hook people into giving up their money. He showed her how to perform staged miracles, from miraculous healing to the fake prophecies he would deliver. But most importantly, he took her to the witch doctor, the source of the spiritual power that had fueled his rise to prominence. The journey to the witch doctor's compound was an eerie one. Hidden deep in the forest, far from the prying eyes of the public, it was a place of dark rituals and ancient powers. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, the kind that made the hairs on the back of Amara's neck stand up. The witch doctor, an old man with weathered skin and piercing eyes, greeted Andy with respect, his voice low and cryptic. Andy introduced Amara as his protégé, and the witch doctor regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "This is the woman," Andy said, his voice strained with unease. "She wants you to give her powers for miracles, signs, and wonders. Please teach her what you taught me." The witch doctor studied Amara for a long moment, as if weighing her soul. Then, with a single nod, he gestured for her to come closer. Amara, despite her bravado, felt a shiver run through her as the witch doctor prepared the ritual. She had seen Andy use this power before, seen him perform miracles in front of thousands of adoring followers. But now, standing here, she was about to become part of it. She was about to tap into the same dark forces that had made Andy the fraud he was. The witch doctor placed his hands on her forehead, muttering incantations in a language Amara didn't understand. The air thickened, and for a moment, Amara felt the weight of something ancient and powerful pressing down on her. But Amara didn't flinch. She had come too far to back out now. When the ritual was over, Amara felt a strange power surge through her, one that was both thrilling and terrifying. She could feel it coursing through her veins, an intoxicating mix of fear and exhilaration. She had done it. She had tapped into the same source of power that Pastor Andy had used to perform miracles and healings. The witch doctor further instructed her to bury 6 six-day-old babies, 3 boys and 3 girls, at the site where she would build her church. He also told her that everyone she healed in her church would recover temporarily but die mysteriously after some time, their life force feeding her spiritual power. Lastly, she was required to sacrifice one member of her congregation every year to maintain her influence, fortune, and power. Amara didn't flinch. The prospect of wealth, power, and connections eclipsed any remnants of morality or conscience. Without hesitation, she agreed to all the witch doctor's terms. But there was one more thing she needed: a church, a monument to her new identity and the empire she intended to build. Turning to Andy, she demanded he use his influence and wealth to fund the project. Andy, already drained and fearful, tried to oppose her, his pride and resources at their limit. "You've gotten everything you wanted," he argued, his voice trembling. "Can't you find your own church yourself?" Amara wasn't moved. With her newfound power and leverage over Andy, she threatened him once more. "This is not a request, but an instruction," she said coldly. "Do it, or you know what follows." Andy, recognizing the danger in defying her, reluctantly complied. Within 4 months, a sprawling 70,000-seater megachurch was built in one of the city's most exclusive areas. It was a grand edifice, complete with luxurious furnishings, a state-of-the-art sound system, and the finest decorations money could buy. Amara's church stood as a symbol of her ambition and cunning, an empire born from lies, sacrifice, and manipulation. She followed the witch doctor's instructions meticulously. On a moonless night, she carried out the burial ritual, assisted by men loyal to her cause. She went to an orphanage and adopted 6 babies in the pretense of raising them as her own, and then she buried all 6 tiny bodies at the region designated for pulpit in silence, their lives cruelly snuffed out for the foundation of her church. Amara felt no remorse. Instead, she saw the act as a necessary step toward her ultimate goal. With the church complete, Amara launched herself as the Mummy G.O. of the Divine Overflow Ministries International. Her charisma and beauty drew crowds by the thousands. She performed dazzling miracles, gave fiery sermons, and declared herself a prophetess sent by God to liberate his people. Her fame spread like wildfire, and in no time the church was packed every Sunday. As the witch doctor had promised, her healings worked wonders, but at a cost. Those who came to her with ailments left rejuvenated, only to die mysteriously weeks or months later. The deaths were always dismissed as coincidental or the work of demonic forces, with Amara blaming the enemy and urging her followers to stay steadfast in their faith. The yearly sacrifices also began. Amara would identify a loyal member of her congregation, someone whose devotion made them an easy target. Under the guise of private prayer sessions or special blessings, she led them to their doom, ensuring her power and influence remained intact. Meanwhile, Andy watched from the sidelines, a shadow of the man he once was. He had created a monster, and now he could do nothing but stand by as Amara's empire outgrew his own. Her congregation dwarfed his, her wealth multiplied exponentially, and her name became more feared and revered than his. But as Amara basked in her newfound glory, a storm was brewing. Secrets have a way of unraveling, and the darker the secrets, the harder the fall. It wasn't long before members began to notice the rise in death tolls within their church. They observed a chilling pattern. Miraculous healings were soon followed by mysterious deaths. Whispers began to circulate, and rumors spread like wildfire about Mummy Go and the true source of her powers. Doubts crept into the hearts of her followers, and attendance began to dwindle. Pastor Andy, who had lost 95% of his congregation to Amara, watched her empire with bitterness and desperation. His own ministry was a shadow of its former self, and he knew he had to act. Fueled by revenge and the hope of regaining his lost members, he made a bold and dangerous move. On a particular Sunday, as Amara stood on the pulpit delivering one of her fiery sermons, Andy's plan came to fruition. He had managed to gain access to her church's AV system, and without warning, a video began playing on the massive screens behind her. The congregation turned their attention to the footage in shock. The video was damning. It showed Amara's secret visit to the witch doctor, her ritualistic sacrifices, and the burying of the 7 newborns beneath the church foundation. Gasps of horror filled the room as the truth unraveled before their eyes. Amara froze mid-sentence, her mind racing. Panic set in as she realized the extent of the betrayal. Her carefully crafted empire was crumbling, and the rage of the crowd was palpable. She dropped her microphone and began backing away, desperately scanning for an exit. As the congregation erupted into chaos, with screams and shouts of fury filling the air, Amara attempted to slip out through the back. But the ushers, already enraged by the revelations, had anticipated her move. They had locked all exits, leaving her trapped with the people she had deceived. The anger of the crowd reached a fever pitch. Unable to contain their rage, they surged toward her. Amara tried to plead for mercy, but her words were drowned out by the furious mob. The congregation, now a vengeful force, descended upon her, stomping, striking, and clawing at her in a collective fury. Amara's screams echoed through the church, but they soon faded. Her lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor of the once grand sanctuary she had built on lies and blood. The crowd, still seething, turned their attention to the church itself. In a final act of retribution, they set the building ablaze, leaving nothing but ash and rubble behind. As the flames consumed the church and Amara's body, the city watched in stunned silence the rise and fall of Mummy Go. But it wasn't the end of the story. Pastor Andy, having orchestrated her exposure, basked in the resurgence of his congregation. With Mummy Go gone, he regained not only his lost members, but also gained new ones, drawn by his bold stand for righteousness. But the triumph was short-lived. Andy had underestimated the vigilance of his congregation. The betrayal they felt at Amara's deception left them wary of blind faith, and the cracks in Andy's carefully crafted facade began to show. Subtle inconsistencies in his messages, extravagant displays of wealth, and questionable miracles raised suspicions among some church workers. The turning point came when one of the media team members stumbled upon archived footage. It was the forgotten video of Amara's desperate attempt to expose Andy during a Sunday service. The moment she had stepped onto the pulpit, claiming she had a confession and a video to share, was abruptly cut short by Andy's intervention. The footage revealed how frantically he had silenced her and diverted the congregation's attention, a moment that, in hindsight, seemed all too convenient. Curiosity turned into a full-blown investigation. A group of skeptical church workers began digging deeper into Andy's past and connections with Amara. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through their small circle. They found the damning sex tapes Amara had used to blackmail Andy, along with evidence of their relationship. The most shocking revelation was Andy's own connection to the witch doctor. Among the files they retrieved were screenshots of transactions and messages that confirmed Andy's visits to the same shrine that had empowered Amara. It became clear that Andy was no different. He had merely been better at covering his tracks. Until now. Word of the findings spread quickly among the inner circle of the church, and soon the congregation was in uproar. Calls for accountability grew louder, and the pressure mounted. Authorities were tipped off, and Pastor Andy was arrested during a midweek service, escorted out in handcuffs while stunned members watched in disbelief. The trial that followed was a media spectacle. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His illicit affair with Amara, the blackmail, and his involvement in dark rituals. Former loyalists testified against him, sharing stories of manipulation and exploitation within the church. Andy's empire crumbled as quickly as it had been rebuilt. His assets were seized, his reputation destroyed, and his once-packed church stood empty. The congregation scattered, many swearing off religion altogether, while others sought solace in smaller, more humble gatherings. The dual downfall of Amara and Andy became a cautionary tale in the city, a reminder that deception, no matter how deeply hidden, will eventually surface. The once mighty Lord Has Done It Finally Ministry International was reduced to rubble, both figuratively and literally, as its legacy became a byword for greed and corruption disguised as faith. In the end, the city moved on, but the scars of betrayal lingered. For those who had once trusted blindly, the story of Amara and Andy was a painful lesson in discernment, faith, and the dangers of unchecked ambition.